Okay, so today I'm going to cover how to create a seamless tileable image texture, and I'm going to go just briefly review some of the alpha layer and other kind of black and white images, using black and white images to drive other nodes within your materials attribute editor. So first things first, I'm going to save my scene and create a default workspace. So go up in Art 102. I'm going to create a new folder, and this is open run textures. It's actually part 3. And the date. And then I'm going to set my project. Set. And create a default workspace. And then I'm going to save my Maya file. And the first thing I'm going to do is create a plane. So I'm going to show you first just how to tile an image on a plane. So first I'm going to create a new material. So I can do it a couple ways. I'm going to go in through my rendering tool menu, and then assign new material, and then choose AI standard surface from my Arnold. Next to color, I'm going to choose the file attribute, and then I'm going to click on the folder to choose my file that I want to tile. So that is up in my textures folder, which is fall 2020 textures and paint. And getting a warning, but maybe that won't matter. Let's just see. So so I'm not seeing it on my plane, and that's for a couple of reasons. I probably need to, I'm going to say, for now I'm not going to create, well, yeah, I'll use all lights. That's going to turn it black because I don't have any lights. So I'm going to go into Arnold and just create a simple sky dome for our purposes today. And then I'm going to turn on my hardware texturing from my shading viewport. Okay, so now I'm going to go back into this is Sky Dome here, select my plane, go back into my AI standard surface, and then scroll up and make sure that I'm going into my color tab here. So I can click down into the file node, and then next to file node, I can go into place 2D texture. So this is going to allow me to change how this image, this file, sits on top of, let's see if I can get into documents and show you what the image looks like on its own. And textures. All right, so this is the image texture. When you're looking for a tileable image, anytime you have these kind of like bold features, you're going to see that repeat in your. You're going to see it repeat on your object. But I think for today's purposes, this will do a pretty good job of showing you how to create a tileable texture, where even if the repeats are obvious, you won't see kind of hard breaks in the edges. And I'm going to do that in Photoshop. So you can tell that this image is stretched, and it's not actually sitting on top of the plane one-to-one. There's a couple of really easy ways to do that. First one I'm going to show you is going up into panels, into orthographic top view, and then I'm going to project. I'm actually going to maybe change the scale of this object so that it's actually a little bit closer to the scale of my image in terms of ratio. If I was doing this like for a client or something, I'd want to go get really dialed in and make sure that like my length and my width and my height ratio matched. So I would want to go into my like channel box editor, into my attribute editor, into my p-plane, and actually change the scale here. For today's purposes, this could be fine. So I'm going to go back into my modeling menu, and I'm going to go into UV and say camera-based projection. So that's going to project my image in one-to-one from the position of my camera. And since I'm in top view, it's going to be a square projection onto my image. The other way I could do that is let's see, go back, actually, now that, when I can't, I guess, undo that, but the other way I could have done that is by selecting my object and then going up into my UV editor, and then I would have been able to, oh, look here, this is great. So now I can, where is my menu set? Tools. Where is my menu set? Oh. Oh, here it is. It's just broken off. Oh dear. Okay, so UV editor, and let's just put that back here on the side, and then I can select my UV selection tool and then drag a box around the corners of my UVs over here in my UV editor, and I'll try to make this a little bit smaller so we can see what's going on. And then I can W, E, and R, right, will give me the same controls. So I can scale, so in this case, since I'm scaling off of the side of my image, you can see it's starting to repeat. But there are these obvious repeat lines, so what we're going to do today is kind of go in and fix that. But for best practices, it's actually better not to do any repeats for flat images in the UV editor. There's actually another place where that's a little bit more appropriate. And I pulled that into I just pulled that in, and unfortunately pulled it into and there we go. Okay, so that's another way you can project so that you have your image is kind of stretched out on your plane in a 1-to-1 ratio. All right, so I'm going to go back into my perspective view so we can kind of see what's going on. I'm going to go back into my object mode, and then go back into my AI standard surface, and then into my color tab, navigate down into my place 2D texture. So my place 2D texture, and now I have, there we go. So my place 2D texture is where I can say how many times do I want this image to repeat on a plane, for instance. So that is my repeat UV. So I'm going to say I want it to repeat 5 times in the X and then 5 times in the Y. And then I have my pattern repeating 5 times in either direction. I can, so here again, you can kind of see this is, while the overall texture, you can kind of see these obvious repeats. You can also see that there's this hard break. So we're gonna go in and play a little bit with Photoshop to get rid of that. One thing you can also do is create this staggered. So that's going to kind of start the next image halfway down, so that rather than kind of this square stagger pattern, you can see it's kind of repeating in its diagonal pattern because the next image is kind of starting halfway down this original image here on the corner. So there's a couple. That's how you would kind of determine how many times you would want to repeat. All right, so I'm going to now kind of leave Maya and then open this image up in Photoshop to show you how you would create a seamless image texture. Okay, so I'm going to click Alt or Command and click the image. When you open up your image in Photoshop, it's going to open it up as a background layer. So I actually, first things first, whenever I open up an image, I like to select it all. So Alt or Command A, and then Command C or Alt C, and then Command V to paste. So I have a background, my original image in my background that I just basically kind of turn off and leave it there just in case I need it. And then I do all of my editing in additional layers. And then for today's purposes, it's going to be, I think that will be fine. All right, so I'm going to select my arrow selection tool, and then I'm going to move. I have the guides turned on so I can tell when my image is kind of the upper right hand side of the corner is now kind of in the middle of the document. So I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm going to hold down Alt or Command, and then oops, redo there. Make sure it's in there. Sorry, I'm going to hold down Option and then drag, and then I'm going to copy my image so that it's copied just to the right of that first image, and then I'm going to do the same thing up here and over here. So I've basically kind of moved this around so that all of the edges that will connect when I repeat this image are now connecting on the inside of my image file, like in the middle, right? And if I can create a seam, a way to kind of like get rid of these seams on the inside, when I repeat this pattern, I know that this is basically, I've cut this seam so that I know this edge and this edge will match up and mirror one another, because I've taken, they're literally the center of they were the center of the image. So all I need to do is now kind of take care of like matching up the center of my image here. And I can do that a lot of different ways. There's some kind of like smart clone tools and some kind of like magic healing. In Photoshop, you're going to find that there are tools that and I'm just pressing Command or Alt and plus to zoom in. And then like once you zoom in to a certain degree, you're looking at your pixels. So I like the clone brush, that was what I got used to. And so I'm just going to press Option to create a target. And then the clone brush is going to, I want to actually be on my top layer here. I'm going to undo that clone. I'm going to say New Layer. And okay, and I want it to be on the top, and then I'm going to make sure that I'm sampling all layers with my clone brush. So from here I want to make sure I'm sampling all layers. Alright, so now I press Alt and make a target, and then I can clone that target, right? So it's going to draw like basically the same thing from that clone. So I could make this my image target, and then it's going to start drawing. And you can see my cursor is kind of where it's drawing, but you can also see that little crosshair where it's sampling the color data from. So I'm going to undo that, and then I might take, and this is kind of like if you're like a painter, this becomes really useful. So I'm actually going to try to kind of create a soft maybe blob coming out from the corner over here. And I can probably borrow something from over here, or I might even be able to borrow like a little bit from over here, but I'm just going to go back and forth until I can kind of get rid of this obvious seam. So I'm going to start here. Yeah. Option. And so I'm trying to match that kind of white line up, and then maybe I'll get my brush over in the middle here and sample from over here and just create a little bit more of a softer edge so it's not quite so obvious. And then maybe I'd want to sample here and kind of drag that out, and then I'd be looking for something that could kind of maybe follow this curve here. So maybe I'll sample that, and with a softer brush you can start making these kind of moves across those hard lines a lot easier. So like I could even get like super kind of just really painterly and not even worry about following these kind of harder edges. Another tool you can use for this is the Smudge tool. That one is Smudge, and that's just going to kind of probably need to sample all layers here. And that's just going to kind of push like pixels around and kind of blur them, right? So there are areas where that might be more useful, but something like here, I'd actually probably want to bring out like an area in the, I'd actually probably want to do a copy and a paste. So I'm going to grab where? I'm going to grab something kind of nondescript, maybe this kind of mushy purple area, and I'm going to draw a selection, a square selection, and I'm going to say edit. I'm going to copy merge, so copy all the layers, and then I'm going to paste, and it's going to create a new layer on top of all the other layers, and then I'm going to drag it over here. And then I'm going to create a layer mask. So a layer mask allows me to use black and white, and anywhere I draw black is going to, that's actually too hard. Anywhere I draw black is going to basically erase the image. Anywhere the image mask is white is going to allow the image to come through. So, oops, I wanted to decrease my. And then I'm going to get a big soft brush, so a big size, and then my hardness all the way down to 0, and then I'm just going to kind of like knock down the edges. And that might be too much, or not enough. Yeah, that looks okay. And then I can start, so that's just kind of like trying to tackle, make this brush smaller, and then make it white so that yeah. And that's okay. It's kind of mushy, but that's fine for our purposes. So I'd probably want to also get rid of like this super obvious white area here, just because it's kind of an aberrant, and it's going to show up. Let's make a new layer on top of everything else. And then make sure I'm sampling all layers. And then I'll sample from over here. Alt, and then maybe make a bigger brush. And you can kind of see now maybe make a masking layer. So I think I just picked up some of that hard edge from the top here, so I want to knock that back down. And the reason that I'm not just doing the clone and deleting is like sometimes you want to retain that information, and it makes it really easy to kind of pull information back out, and rather than just kind of deleting it. So I'm going to sample from over here and make my brush smaller. So I'm pressing the open bracket and close bracket, that up and down. That will allow me to make my brush bigger and smaller. It's kind of more obvious over here. So that's bigger and smaller, and that's the open and close brackets. And you can kind of preview, so that doesn't look quite right. So I'm going to try, it's probably too blue. I kind of like it. That might be enough. Oh, I'm actually drawing on my, I was drawing on my mask layer there. And another target, and knock that back up. All right, and then I'm just gonna kind of soften this edge and this is kind of a messy area anyway, so that's gonna, I can take like a little bit of like inaccurate sampling. That's great. And then for here, I think what I'd want to do is probably push this hand tool, smudge. Let's see what finger painting. I think that'll allow me to stretch it out with not quite so much. Ooh. That is interesting. Let's turn that off. Yeah. I like this smudge tool over here because these colors are kind of like similar, so I feel like they can just kind of bleed into one another. In other areas where the colors are a little bit different, I'd probably want to handle this differently. And then I'd probably want to, I'm going to sample from up here, I think, to bring this red up into this seam here. So go back in and Alt. And maybe just shift that up a little bit. Yeah. So the hardest part is going to be here, and kind of like that white splotch that was up here earlier. So let me just turn all this stuff off. Oh, I was drawing on my, see, this is why. I think I was drawing on my layers. Oh well. I'll turn this back on. So kind of like this white splotch up here, I'm actually going to copy, I think, all of this, and then transform it a little bit so that it kind of overhangs, and I might do the same kind of back and forth. So I'll show you what I mean here. So I'm going to Command-C to copy, and then I'm actually going to say paste in place, and then Command or Alt-T for transform. Ooh. I don't think I copied all layers there. So I'm going to select, reselect, and then edit, copy merged, and then edit, paste in place, and then Command or Alt-T for transform, and then hold down Shift so you can transform one direction only, and that looks pretty good. And now I'll use the mask layer on that and the black to kind of erase those hard edges, and another big soft brush, medium, and make my brush smaller, and then go in and kind of define an edge here. And if you can kind of, make overlaps, right, like across that hard edge, the eye is much more forgiving, right? Like, so even if this doesn't look quite right, I could even bring that back with a little bit harder of an edge or a smaller brush, maybe. Your eye is going to be way more forgiving of that than like a hard line down the center of your image. And then I'm going to use a little bit bigger of a brush and go back in and maybe do some cloning. Make sure I'm on my color layer, and Alt, and maybe sample back down and do kind of like a push and pull there. Yeah. For here, what would I want to do? I mean, the easy thing is just going to be pull this kind of darkness into that area, so I'm going to go for the easy. And I'm going to option, and then, why is this not working? Let's see. Sample all layers, clone stamp, option. Let's just make a new layer. Option. There we go. And get rid of the obvious repeats. And then for this, I'm probably going to pull that sample and just kind of see. Yeah, that looks pretty good. All right, so I still don't love that. I think I didn't quite, when I copied my image, I don't think I quite copied enough. So let's say new layer. Okay. And then I'm gonna, what I want is that, but kind of like rotated. Yeah, that's pretty good. But I could also do Alt or Command T and then transform, and then just rotate that. Oops. Rotate that a little bit. There you go. All right, yeah, I mean, this could definitely use some more work, especially up in here, but I think for our purposes, that's okay. Let me just, because I'm a perfectionist, can't let it go. And make this smaller, and I don't like those obvious repeats, so I'm gonna kind of take out the obvious line and make it just a little bit softer. Yeah. And maybe I'd even like, because it starts getting a little bit smudgy when you use clone too much, so I might sample from over there and then just do kind of like a center so that it picks up some of that original texture. Yeah, That looks pretty good. Again, like this looks a little bit funny to me, but I think since it's such like a kind of warbly image anyway, I think that would be fine. All right, so now that I've got all of these saved, I'm going to test it out before I move into tiling in Maya. I'm just going to hit Command or Alt A to select all, Command C to copy. Actually, I want to copy merged. And then I'm going to hit Alt or Command N for new, and then I'm going to say use the clipboard and create, and then Alt or Command V to paste, and then yeah, I'm actually going to transform, make this smaller, and then hit it so that it's kind of, I hit that middle mark so that it's like roughly 1/4 of the size, and then I'm just going to test this out. So with my selection tool, I'm going to hold down Option and then click drag, and then Option, hold down Shift will allow you to kind of lock into XY coordinates, and then ta-da! So all of my edges are now matching up beautifully. So I'm happy with that. So I'm going to now say maybe I could go back into my window, into my history, and bring me back to this paste. And I'm going to save this image. So this is what I've just pasted from this layer. And if as far as kind of save as far as professional practice goes, I like to save my PSD file with all of my layers. Save that in case I need to go back and do any work. And I'm going to save that in my textures. So I'm going to say Paint Seamless, and then save the PSD file. And then I'm going to say File, Save As, and then I'm going to save it as PNG again is probably fine for Paint Seamless PNG, and that's going to flatten all the layers, so it's just one layer. Okay, and now I can go back into Maya and say Continue, and then go into my file, and then click on my little folder, and then attach it now to the Seamless PNG and open. And I think I've got my Place 2D texture staggered so I can still see edges, but I'm going to turn that off. And now I've got this gorgeous repeating image. Still can tell, I'm going to turn the grid off for a second. I can still obviously see these kind of major repeats, but let's say if I wanted to like repeat it probably 3 times, it's not going to be quite as obvious to the viewer, right? So that is how you make the seamless texture. That's how you determine how many times it repeats on a plane.